Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmer, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service and jbiztechvalley.com.
And Rabbi, what's coming up in September? Back to school.
You're going to school, Mark?
So that's when you have to respect no turn on red symbols and all that. So you got to know when the kids go back to school.
All right.
Well, so with us today we have the superintendent of the Schenectady School District, Larry Spring. And spring, that's, spring, fall, winter, but Larry, I'm sure you've heard that before.
Spring forward.
That's
yes.
right. So welcome to the show, welcome to the Jewish View. It's so good to see you here and to get a different perspective than from a smaller city in the capital region.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
And maybe we should start just with numbers, because I live in Delmar myself, but I know Schenectady, how many children are going to school? And in how many schools? Just get the basic facts out there.
Sure. Schenectady has about 10,000 students in the district across 17 different schools.
And that's elementary, middle, and high school?
Yep. Yeah, so we've got some pre-K programs. Those are in addition to those 10,000.
That's part of the
Is that
part of the 17 schools, the pre-K?
Well, some of them are in those 17 schools and some are separate.
Okay.
We also have an adult ed center. And the students who are going for their GED or furthering their English education are in addition to those 10,000.
What's your biggest challenge today?
Well,
Common Core?
No, actually, it's not. The Common Core, I think, is a pretty reasonable and it's a challenge that we accept in education. Standards change. Our challenge right now is that the needs that our kids have. Schenectady has some tremendous poverty. Kids come to school with some really pressing and dire needs, and Schenectady receives a very small percentage of the state funding that we're supposed to get, and so to try to meet the needs of these children and to do so without all of the resources that the law says we're supposed to get, makes for some very creative problem solving.
Do they get breakfast and lunch? So they are giving breakfast and lunch.
We're doing the community eligibility provision, which means 100% of our students in all of the schools get breakfast and lunch every single day.
Okay. Now you come from a much smaller district, Cortland Schools, and you started 2 years ago in 2012. So you came from Cortland Schools, which was 1/3 the size of Schenectady.
Yeah.
So while Schenectady is one of the smaller school districts in this area, it was still a tremendous leap for you professionally to be able to come to the capital district.
Yeah, so Cortland had just under 3,000 kids. It still had some poverty, but 5 schools across the entire district. I could easily get my own hands around all of that. Going to Schenectady, it's the biggest district in the capital region.
Schenectady is?
Schenectady is.
Larger than Albany? In terms of what?
Larger than Albany in terms of number of students. Larger than Albany. Sometimes back and forth with Shenendahoa.
Really?
We're
and I'm saying it's one of the smaller. So look at that. I'm sorry.
We're very close every year back and forth with Shenendahoa.
Just go back to the poverty. Really, if they're given, what's the problem in a sense? Could you articulate it? If they're giving breakfast and lunch, you can say if a kid doesn't have what to eat, obviously, how can you do in school? But they're given the food, so what now is the problem if a kid, doesn't come with the nicest gym shoes in the world?
Sure.
Articulate what the issues are.
Yeah, so when we think about, where food insecurity comes from, it really comes from, families not having the means with which to put food on the table on a regular basis. And if we're able to give kids food, it certainly helps alleviate those physical needs. And having kids not be hungry during the school day is helpful. But when you think about what else goes along with poverty, what we see with kids is this pervasive mental health or mental illness kinds of things that come about. So kids who are living in that state begin to develop anxiety, that turns into depression, and we have a fairly high number of students at very young ages where it's gotten to the point where it actually is diagnosable or labeled as PTSD.
Which is?
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's usually you always hear that with war.
Right. So PTSD is something that you associate with really intense acute traumatic events, somebody who's been in a battle and things like that.
Right.
And what we're finding is that kids who are subjected to this chronic, it's not as intense in a particular moment, but it's chronic trauma that's associated with living in that level of poverty, begin to develop the same symptoms of PTSD over time. And it all stems from anxiety and depression in living in these uncertain circumstances. And so trying to provide services to these kids so that they're able to feel like school is a safe place, that they're able to drop some of that anxiety at the door, drop some of the coping behaviors, that they need in order to survive on a daily basis, and step into a classroom and learn how to read is a tough challenge.
It sure is. And then you have other people on the children on the autism spectrum, and
Yep.
those are special ed classes, which you have quite a few of.
We do. We have a very high
And
classification
Schenectady
rate.
Public School deals with autism?
Yes.
This I would think would be a special school, not public school.
Well, so, sometimes, so we have, about 20% of our students right now are identified as special education. Some of those students, not quite 10% of them, or maybe a little over 10%, are being served in schools outside of our school district. But, a
The
little.
school tax dollars go to pay for those outside services, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, it's a mix. So it's some of our services, but also some state and federal aid contribute to that. And there's all kinds of complex formulas, to try to figure out after the fact, how much of which gets paid from
That's
where.
right. Now, let me ask you about this lottery, about the state lottery, because that was supposed to, in my view, when I heard about this, was supposed to be in addition to state aid, not instead of. And it seems to be instead of. I mean, what could be done to make sure that maybe state aid increases on a regular basis, let's say 2-3% at the minimum, and then whatever the lottery receipts are that have 60%, I think, of the lottery receipts have to go to education, then that comes on top of it. But it seems like the state aid portion of the formula shrinks as the lottery numbers grow. And I'm asking your professional opinion because you've had to experience this.
Sure,
and deal
yeah.
with it.
I've been fighting this battle, pretty intensely for a little while. How state aid is distributed in the state is really a political process. And, there is a law that says here's basically how much money each district should receive in state aid based on what the experts think it should cost to bring each child in that district up to a level of sound basic education, and subtract out from that what they think each community is able to contribute on their own. However, that formula kind of gets thrown out the window through the political process of budgeting. So how to ensure that aid is distributed in a reasonable way, and that lottery aids are done in addition to that, really requires an engagement in that political process, trying to make sure that all legislators have a really good understanding of what's happening to funding across districts, across the state, what's really fair, what their advocacy for their own particular districts is doing across the whole state, and trying to find a way to bring some level playing field to that.
Now, you have a lobbying association, the School Superintendents Association? Or
So there are a number of associations
the
that we
School
belong
Boards
to.
Association?
Yeah, small
Okay.
city schools as
Right.
well. Yep,
But there is a School Superintendents Association?
yep, New
Okay.
York State Council of School
Oh,
Superintendents.
I knew it was NISCOS or
Yep.
something, yeah.
Yep.
So,
What, just, Mark,
Yeah.
I want to go back to, because it is the Jewish view, but once you were talking about, how a child has to come not just with a full stomach, which is of course important, but almost like a full mind, if you want to say that. I just wanted just to bring out an idea from the Talmud, because everybody knows the Talmud is very intellectual and, across the board, not only amongst Jews, people know that. And it's really called the oral law. Well, that's a contradiction. It's the Talmud's written. You can pick up a Gemara, Talmud, it's written. Why do they call it the oral law? Well, 2,000 years ago, they stopped being oral. It used to be oral 2,000 years ago. So why did they write it down if it's supposed to be oral? And that was under the Roman persecution, same time as, Jesus, that kind of era was a political unrest, bottom line. And they just saw, because of political unrest, that's their answer, people couldn't think straight. I mean, they were smarter than we are, but in any case, you can't, you have to come to class and you have to learn and you have to be, focused, if that's the right word. And they just say it's impossible if you know that someone's going to knock on the door and arrest you, or in poverty, you can only imagine, father was screaming at me or is on drugs. One of my 10 jobs is go to chaplain in the Jewish prisoners, but a lot of other people show up. And, and they tell me, I have kids. Well, you have kids, or I see kids visiting their parents, my heart breaks. So, I mean, if this is a situation, how are you going to come to school? Oh, yes, I'd just like to learn and read a book, and knowing, there's crime in the streets, there's sirens all the time, et cetera, et cetera. People just don't even have a bigger picture the way I'm sure you do, but I also have, what these kids are living with, and how can you sit there and learn.
Yeah, there are a lot of schools of thought. We don't necessarily need the mental health professionals to tell us that for children to learn well, they have to be at peace in mind and at peace in the heart. They need to feel safe. They need to feel secure. They need to feel that the adults around them have their best interests at heart in order to learn best. And certainly we've got a lot of kids who are living in circumstances that they're not really sure of that all of the time. We know that there is a certain amount of damage that's done to children when their father is taken away to prison. We know that if there's mental health issues in the home, if a parent has a chronic or intense mental illness, or if there's drug abuse in the house, or if there's violence in the neighborhood, we know that all of those things take a toll on kids, and that's something that we then have to pick up and work on in the school before we can get kids to learn to read.
How can you work on that? What is the advice then? That's always my million-dollar question. How can you, calm a child down if they're coming from that environment?
Well, there are a couple of things that you need to do, and the biggest thing for us is to think about all of the things that we need to do before that happens. Right? So we can't always anticipate when that's going to happen, and so we need to make sure that we're prepared, and that means having good, predictable patterns in the school. The kids know this is how the day is going to run. These things are going to be stable. There might be chaos going on in other parts of my life, but I know that school is going to be routine. This is something that I can count on, and I can bank on that being that way. I know that my teacher is going to do this when I get there. Yep, my teacher is going to say this to me. Then there are things that we can do in terms of interacting with that particular child when it does happen, and recognizing, that all behavior is telling us something. And so when a child is experienced in an event like that, usually the way in which we're informed is through the child's behavior. And so when they're being disruptive, when they're acting out, they're usually telling us that they're hurting somehow. And we need to be ready to listen to that and recognize that, it might not be, that they don't like me or they don't like math class. It might be something else that they're trying to tell us.
Because they can't always verbalize what they're saying,
Right.
What they're feeling rather, and they may not want to verbalize. It may be embarrassing or whatever. So you have to be intuitive as not just a superintendent, but a principal, a vice principal, teacher. All of those leaders in education have to be intuitive to not take it personally.
Right.
Right.
And recognize that, this behavior is trying to tell me something. My job is to figure out what it is that they're trying to tell me. And so how do I, help them out of a situation that could become really difficult, could become explosive, get them in a situation where they can calm down, let the cortisol, clear out of their brain a little bit, let them calm down and get them into a space or a place where they can begin to verbalize and talk about what it is, that's upsetting them. And that's a really, different kind of process when you're talking about, a 5-year-old or a 16-year-old. Those are really different things in terms of their ability to verbalize, what they're feeling and what's going on. So
what
those are
about
different
crime
methods.
in the school? That's sometimes an issue. What if someone pulls out a knife? Like you say, a 6-year-old, you're not dealing with 5-year-old, 10-year-old kids. We're talking about small little kids, which is terrible, of course, the abuse in the family. But, you're dealing with 16, 17-year-olds in the high school, and these guys are beyond just talking back. They can do some real trouble.
Sure, yeah. And so there's this place where we kind of think about this line between criminal behavior and just, bad behavior. And so thinking about, students who violate the code of conduct and just, some bad behavior, and we deal with that internally. Kids that get detention or they'll get suspended, those kinds of things. But things that you described, if somebody were to pull a knife, and luckily we're in a place right now where we really don't see that kind of behavior very much.
Oh, very good.
And that behavior very much is in that realm of, that's criminal behavior. And we don't want to get the police involved with kids unnecessarily. We don't want to criminalize behavior that's really just, kids learning to grow up and deal with rules and each other and that kind of stuff. But there are some things when, we start thinking about, school safety, personal safety, putting kids' lives at risk. That's clearly on that other side of, well, this is a police matter. It really is irrelevant that it happened in school. That's not okay.
At
and
least
it's a
you don't
crime.
have metal detectors in the entrances to your schools like I had in Brooklyn. So, I went to the school, high school I went to, the show Welcome Back, Kotter was based on my class, literally. So, it's a whole different world up here than it was in Lafayette High School in Brooklyn. So people tell me like Albany High is really bad. So I went to Albany High to look. And I see lockers in the hallway, and I'm like, well, do you have lockers in the hallway?
We do.
Oh, and I say, well, why? because in Brooklyn, if you have lockers in the hallway, you're going to get powder put through the vents in the locker, or you're going to get the lock clipped, or you're going to find silly string there. I'm not giving people ideas, but this is something that you would find. You wouldn't, in Brooklyn, you wouldn't have. We carried the books everywhere. You never put books in a locker except when you went to gym, and then you were lucky that you had them when you came out of gym. I can't tell you how many times my clothes were stolen. I went home in my gym shorts.
Well,
And but so I look here, there's no graffiti, at least that I saw, and you have lockers and you have civility, and I don't see what's so bad.
One of our strategies.
Sorry to take so long with the explanation, but I thought it was entertaining.
One of the things that we're trying to do is get people to change their impression of Schenectady, and especially of our high school, and we find one of the most effective ways for us to do that is to invite people into the school.
Okay.
And when we have them come in, we have them walk the building while the kids are there. They see it's a high school. It's very much like any other high school around. There's 2,700 kids in it. It's a big high school, but the kids are on their way to class.
Yeah.
They're there to learn.
Now you did combine maybe before your time, two high schools into one.
Yep, a long time ago.
So you got rid of Linton High School.
Yep, long time ago, Mount Pleasant and Linton came together on the site of what was then Linton. That became Schenectady High. Mount Pleasant is now a middle school. That's also where my office is. The central offices are there.
Really? Okay.
At Mount Pleasant.
I'll have to know that. Not that I want to go to the principal or superintendent's office, but only for good things, How deep do you get into? Does that have to go up the chain? Let's say with the crime matters or bad behavior matters. I would think it gets handled below your level of superintendent.
Well, it does. So anytime that there's a suspension for more than 5 days, it has to be done at a superintendent's hearing. Principals are allowed to suspend for up to 5 days, but beyond 5 days, it goes to a superintendent's hearing. I have, other administrators in the central office who run those hearings, but my role in that is twofold. So when I wrote out the procedures, this is how those hearings will happen. And then I also do the data afterwards. They make recommendations to me about how long a student should be suspended. But we have a history of disproportionality with our discipline. That means that in particular, black students get suspended for longer periods of time or with greater frequency than their percentage of the population would warrant.
I see.
And so we've been looking at that and checking how can we respond better to our students of color and help them be more successful in school and not be suspended as much. And so one of the things that I do is I check our data every time that there is a suspension to make sure that we're within those bounds of normalcy, that we're not giving somebody a longer suspension or a shorter suspension just because that people get
another
treated the
problem
same.
that we have so many police chiefs on the show, Mark. I don't know. Mark's got to go to school and to jail. I don't know. In any case, but very serious. We do talk about the drug problem. That's one of the big issues in the Capital District, I'm sure around the country, really. And they say they're starting earlier and earlier, so it's not like, okay, a 20-year-old is doing something wrong. I mean, you're not only high school, but they're talking about middle school kids. So you see
Yep.
that, or how do you deal with that?
Some, so, I think kids are kids in a lot of different ways. And so, when they start hitting those preteen years, they start, engaging in experimental kind of behavior, and for lots of reasons, So sometimes it's
Raging hormones.
right. Sometimes it's rebellion against parents. Sometimes it's peer pressure. If they're seeing an older group of kids that they want to be around, they start
And
to do
it's
things.
bullying.
And sometimes there's bullying.
Right.
Sometimes there's self-medication that's going on. Kids are looking for something to numb the pain. There are a lot of those different things that go on, and so
In Schenectady schools. And when you say
Well,
a lot,
I would say
don't mean a lot. You
Well,
just-
I would say not so much in school,
Uh-huh.
and I'm using a pretty broad.
Yes,
pretty
that's
broad.
why I'm reining you in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that we need to start doing that we haven't done is some formal screening to find out just how many kids are doing these things, and I would be hesitant to underestimate, because if we really start to think about if we were to, when we get a formal screening done and start to look, I think a lot of communities, not just Schenectady, I think we underestimate how many of our children are trying, whether that's alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, prescription pills,
Heroin.
these kinds of things.
Which is the big problem for law enforcement, yeah.
Kids, experiment, and I think when we don't ask, when we don't do, formal screens to find out, what's going on with our kids, I think we often assume it can't be that many. I'm sure it's not a lot of kids, but I think that in other places and other times when I've done this, and when we look at the national data, I would say we're probably not an exception, and it probably is happening with greater frequency and at earlier ages than what we would be comfortable with. And so we want to find out, just how much of it is going on, how early are kids engaging in that, and what are some ways in which we can find out
like
sooner.
drug education? I mean, you're telling that the kids don't do it. I mean, again, you're never going to stop everything 100%.
Well, I'm sure you have the DARE program
Right.
in your schools. Right?
Well, not so much the DARE program. There were some interesting things about the DARE program and how that played out, but certainly, drug education, I think that, we're very, I think, good at figuring out, what are the evidence-based programs that really have an impact on helping kids to make different choices. And so,
How did you know to do that? Did you go to school and they teach you the psychology of the kid and the sociology of the kids, and then do they teach? I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I always thought teaching, you just had to learn how to express yourself to the students so the students would learn, but it seems like there's so much more that go into preparing the teacher to be a principal, to be a superintendent. I mean, it seems that's not just administrative anymore. It's just not pushing paper.
right. So it would be
It's just amazing.
right. It would be amazing if it was just knowing your pedagogy, right? Just how here's how to teach a good lesson, and just do that, and you're good. But really understanding not just how to teach a good lesson, but you've really got to know your content. You also have to really understand how it is that kids come to know, what makes a student learner.
Yeah.
How do kids
But as a
construct knowledge.
superintendent, what was your progression? When you were going to school, teacher's school, I guess,
Yep,
because
sure.
Albany had a teacher's college. Where did you go?
Well, I went to the State University of New York at Geneseo.
Okay.
And I went to school to become, I didn't go to become a social studies teacher, but I left as a social studies teacher.
Okay.
And I taught social studies outside of Rochester, New York, in East Irondequoit, and started getting into professional development, teaching teachers how to do some things. And I learned then an awful lot about assessment and building good assessment tools. What are good assessments? What are not so good assessments? Weighing the various variables or pros and cons of different types of assessments. That led me into administration. I was an assistant principal and then a special education
But you had
director.
to still take courses along the way, in addition to holding down your professional position. You
Each
had
of
to
those-
be...
Yeah, each of those steps took me to more courses, You know,
Yeah.
and some of those were kind of basic courses. Some of them are, you know, kind of the history of education or, you know, education law. Some of them I had a little more opportunity to choose with, you know. And
Did you do any of this online classes, or was this all in the classroom itself?
Yeah, this was a little bit before there were online classes.
Well, you're young. I don't know. How old are you?
I'm 45.
45. You're young. Yes, you're very young.
So this was before there were online
You've done a
classes.
lot in a very young, at a young age. You really have.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really impressed by how much, you know, you've analyzed where you are and how you got here and all that.
How much
Bill,
pressure,
I'm sorry,
just how much pressure are you to raise up, you know, like, you know, to raise up the scores? You know, I guess that's what Common Core is, isn't it?
Well, yeah, they increased just a few percentage points, and
I mean,
you know,
how are you supposed to do it? Like your job, they're going to look at you. Are the kids getting smarter? Well, what are you supposed to do? I mean,
Yeah. So and that presents always for us a, you know, a really difficult kind of issue because, you know, we are so underfunded. You know, we don't have anywhere as close to the resources that we need in order to provide this work. You know,
how much more money would you need to provide the resources? And you ever calculate that? How much you?
Yeah.
How much do you get from? What's your budget?
Sure, we're about a $160 million budget.
Right.
The state gives us 55% of the aid that the law says they're supposed to give us, which means that, you know, they give us $60 million less.
And
every
that's
year.
made up by taxes, property
Well,
taxes?
no, it's not. Some of it is made up by taxes, but we do with a lot less every year. You know, but because we try to make up some of it with taxes, we have an elevated tax rate in the city, and that contributes to, you know, the lower property values, evictions, foreclosures, and things like that. It inhibits economic development in the city. If we received the median level of aid, right, so the median district in New York State gets 82% of what they're supposed to get by law. Now, there are some districts who get many, many times what they're supposed to get.
Really?
But the median district gets 82%. If we received 82% of our aid, that would be about $38 million. For $38 million, we could intervene with intensity with our mental health needs with kids. We could do some very intense academic remediation and help kids. And then we think about our older kids who are already, you know, kind of, you know, down that path, but are dropping out of school. We could help engage those kids, get them some mentoring and some internship experiences, and entice them to engage and persist in school. And at the same time, within that same $38 million, do those three things, we could lower property taxes by a third.
And you would still have a $160 million budget?
Yes.
Okay, so you would just be
Well,
more,
no, the budget would be
$38 million more?
Well, a third of that 38 million would go back to the taxpayers. So 2/3 of that 38 million would go on top of the $160 million
26 million
budget.
would go on top of that.
Right.
So, but, you know, I know you cut down library, you know, you decimated your library program pretty much.
We've reduced our library program by about a third.
Wow.
You know, it's you know, we've reduced some music programs. You know, 2 years ago we increased our class size at the elementary level
Yeah, but a
to the
third,
maximum.
the library program is a third from last year, but for the past 5 years, let's say, or 6 years, I mean, you really took a chunk. I mean, you've only been there 2, but it really has been decimated over the past 5 years. Because I know someone who was a librarian in the Schenectady schools, and she shuttled between schools.
Yep, there's some sharing of librarians. Over the past 5 years, we've cut close to 400 positions in the district. You know, this past year, you know, the deficit was not nearly what it was, you know, the last couple of years, and so we only had to cut a little over 60 people. The year before, the deficit was.
These are teachers?
Some are teachers.
So what do you do, make
some
the
are
class size
paraprofessionals.
bigger? I mean, that's what,
It's class size getting bigger. It's not offering some classes.
You know,
it's
well,
restricting the opportunities of kids.
you know, and I know, you know, you got the most senior member is in the Senate, Hugh Farley, and now you have some freshman legislators and some Republican legislators. So it's on the Assembly side, it's a little bit light, but I know on the Senate side, you know, you got some powerhouse there. So maybe.
Well, you know, I think it's always it's a difficult conversation. I think, and I think you know we sometimes put Senator Farley in a difficult position.
And he loves it,
asking
'cause
him
he's
to advocate for us in that way. But oftentimes what happens in politics is, if we're gonna fold more money into education, we're gonna give everybody some share of that. And my viewpoint has been that there are some districts that are already getting more than 100% of their share of aid.
Wow.
We're only getting 55%. I'm not sure that some districts should get any of the increase.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
we're
thank
out
you.
of time
Yes,
over here.
yes,
Larry,
thank you,
Dad,
Larry.
it's really great to having you on and just sharing with our viewers and it's connected, but really it's issues all over the capital districts, probably all over the United
Well, we
States.
have to have you back.
That we have
Absolutely.
the school, that we want better education for schools. Of course, that's a very Jewish concept, is the Jewish view that children should have a good education and a good moral and ethical background just to have everything good in their lives. They're innocent people and they should have everything they want and keep up the good work with good health.
Yes.
Thank you so
Keep
much
up the
for
good
having
work,
me.
And don't pass school buses and don't make right on red when you're not supposed to.
All right, when you see those flashing red lights,
That's
stop.
right. No.